You hear a specialist in health and nutrition called Dr. Gregor McGregor discussing the ideal healthy diet for humans. Good evening, I'm Dr. Gregor McGregor. In this talk, I want to discuss what we know about a healthy diet and confront some of the misinformation that gets passed around about what types of food are better or worse for us. So let's get right to it. What is the healthiest diet? Well, the best available balance of evidence suggests that the healthiest diet is one centered around fruits, vegetables, legumes or beans, split peas, chickpeas and lentils, whole grains and nuts. Basically, real food that grows out of the ground. This is our healthiest choice. And all the while minimizing our intake of meat, eggs, dairy, and processed junk. So plant-based. A plant-based diet centered around whole plant foods. That's the secret. But of course, it isn't really a secret, and I don't think anyone listening will be surprised to hear this. So what's the issue here? Why is there so much debate around this issue when the evidence seems so clear? A part of the problem, seems to me, is diets and what might be called the dieting industry. I mean, diets, by definition, don't work, right? Because you go on them, then you go off. What we need is a lifestyle. What we need is a way to eat and live so that we can live a long, healthy life. And to do that, thankfully, the same diet that's associated with longevity is the same diet that's so effective in controlling weight. But there's so much discussion out there online about what's better or worse to eat. There's a lot of conflicting information out there backing up different sides. For example, there is information saying meat is good for you, eggs are good for you, dairy is good for you. And it's really confusing people because it seems to be like no matter what you believe in, you'll find the proof to back it up. But of course, the proof that meat is good for you is backed up by the meat industry, right? That eggs are good for us, backed up by the egg industry. I mean, this is a classic kind of tobacco industry tactic. The tobacco industry really pioneered the tactics that different interest groups in the food industry use all the time now. The tobacco industry was the first to use science against itself. This was one of their great innovations. This is, in the 1940s and 50s. Basically, they realized that science was venerated, as it should be, as a way to kind of sift through what is true and what's not. And the public believed that. And when there was this tremendous body of literature starting in the 1930s and certainly around the 1950s, that, non-smokers had at least 90% less lung cancer risk than smokers. I mean, by the time the US Surgeon General's report in the 1960s, 1964, came out, they had 7,000 studies, all showing in some way the health risks associated with smoking. So you'd think that after the first few thousand research studies came out, somebody in the government would do something about it, right? But tobacco was a very powerful industry. I mean, it took that much, that overwhelming massive evidence, to finally get the powers that be to just recognize that smoking was killing people. And the tobacco industry tactic was to fund their own science. They have this Tobacco Institute where they fund their own scientists just to instill doubt. They knew they couldn't go up against 7,000 studies. In fact, there's a famous tobacco industry memo called Doubt is Our Product. And this was a PR company saying, all we have to do is introduce enough doubt. Some scientists say tobacco is good, some say it's bad, so who knows? And so the food industry is the same. The hope is that all the contradictory evidence and confusion makes people just kind of throw up their hands in the air and eat whatever is put in front of them. So this is good for the trillion-dollar food industry, but it's not good for our health and well-being. And we do have a lot of evidence suggesting diets heavy in meat and dairy are not very good for you. The most powerful data we have are these interventional studies. For example, you look at the longest, healthiest living populations around the world, the so-called blue zones, with the most centenarians, people living over 100. Whether it's Okinawa in Japan, Seventh-day Adventists in the USA, or Nicoya in Costa Rica. If you do a Venn diagram of all these blue zones, what they share in common is a plant-based diet, and specifically legumes. For example, Okinawa, the second longest living population in the world, they have a 97% plant-based diet.